So moving on with editing. So the there's kind of a style that the director uses where there's repetitions of scenes, and this happens quite a bit, especially from, he'll do it one way from young Joe's perspective and then another way from old Joe's perspective, with kind of like an aha moment coming from one of those where we were kind of confused before. Like I said before, there's also like 3 parts to the plot. So there's also, a lot of repetition within those 3 sequences, but the beginning of them, at 0 minutes, at 30 minutes, and then at 36 minutes, they all start with the same scene of young Joe facing a blank white tarp, which old Joe from the future will pop up on. So each of these are the same, kind of coming to a somewhat similar end. They're very interconnected, and he's using this repetition. You also kind of see this at the end of plot 1 and 3 when Joe is falling towards the car. It just fades to black in plot 1, but then plot 3 you see him actually hit the car. Another thing Rian Johnson does is that he uses editing with quick cuts to convey a lot of information, especially in the beginning of the film, like during the exposition when he's trying to explain a lot of things. He just cuts to people's faces instead of having Joseph Gordon-Levitt do more voiceover narration, which would have taken a lot longer. So it kind of cuts to Joseph Gordon-Levitt laying on his bed, relaxed. He just used drugs and kind of shows that's the only way to relax in this stagnant dystopian future. Then it jumps to him unveiling his sports car in an enclosed parking structure. And that's the only, way you can, then it also, before that, it cuts to, the faces of several desperate homeless people, that are living on the street with shopping carts, obviously really dirty and grungy. And, this contrasted with the sports car in the parking garage shows, both the poverty of the present time, but also demonstrates the lengths Joe must go to in order to keep his sports car from being stolen or stripped. Then it jumps to a lot of worried mothers that are clutching their children and kind of stroking their heads. And they're all very worried and pensive. So this is conveying the lack of hope and anxiety among those in this part of Kansas during the year 2044. Later on, outside of Club Abe's nightclub, which is the only club in town, it's called La Belle Aurore, which is French for beautiful sunrise. It jumps to a lot of the people's faces of waiting in line. So ennui is shown in the face of the bored prostitute, and meekness is shown on the shy woman's face, who isn't all that attractive. You kind of imagine that she has a hard time getting into the club, and she's got on, her best clothes in hopes of this being the night. Then it shoots to a lot of the ostentatious fashion trends. There's blue platform heels, scarves, boas, red polyester dresses. It's all very reminiscent of Studio 54. So all of these jump cuts of the fashion provide us with an insight to the type of culture that this town and this nightclub have. It's very superficial, cliquey, full of empty sex, and revolved around drugs, just like the disco culture which inhabited Studio 54. So I think that's why he contrasts this, and a lot is unsaid by his use of editing here to convey a ton of information, some through jump cuts, through montage. And like I said, if it had come through Joe's narration, it would have been considerably longer, and we would have had to have much more patience. There are a few songs played, mostly in the beginning and end of the movie, especially during montages. But other than that, it's mostly just score. You also don't hear music playing in the movie from a radio. And it doesn't, like I said, it only plays during these kind of montages, not during the normal linear flow of the movie. So there's score behind a lot of normal time action, but no music. But I really do love the score. I think it's very moving, like I said previously, especially when old Joe kills the innocent kid. It just kind of comes in with this high string thing right after like this low kind of bass thing. It's great. Then there's also kind of the use of silence, which if I recall correctly, there was never zero silence, but there were times when it was almost silent, like the three tarps that start each of the three plots where Joe's waiting by the tarp. It's dead silent, except for like some rustling in the far off like wheat field that's hanging out there. And there's a little bit of rustling. There's also a very big moment when old Joe first sees the woman who he falls in love with, who changes his wife, who gets killed, who makes him go back in time to try and set it right so she doesn't get killed. The first time he sees her face is during this bar fight, and everything slows down. Old Joe gets hit in the face and kind of stumbles back, but then this woman catches his eye, and all of a sudden the sound mutes to a volume where you almost can't hear it, of the fight and the noise and what he says and what she says, and you just hear this slow version of the theme, which kind of gets transformed through various scenes, like a lot of movies do that, where they have one theme, like an American Gigolo, Call on Me by Blondie, that's slowed down and sped up, it's played with. So this is kind of a slow, tender version of that theme that plays over this interaction. So it slows down, it's slow motion, he sees her, walks up to her, talks to her, you can't really hear it, she gives him the finger, but she, you can tell, like, she kind of likes him, and then it jumps to, a montage of him getting to know her and having this great content life with her. But, there's an instance where, it's almost silent except for score, but, never completely silent. But, that's another great scene that I really like, where I think the score is also very moving. And then, finally the film ends with Sarah, after she's tucked Sid in, she goes out and looks at young Joe, who's laying there, dead. And after she runs her fingers through his hair, like I previously said, she looks over at his pocket watch, which is open on the floor, and she ends up, just one finger closing that lid, so it shuts, and then you stop hearing it tick. And for me, that signified that the passage of time was finally being corrected and finally able to continue as this loop was finally closed. So that's all I got. Thanks for listening. I'll post a few images and a few bullet points on the blog to help with this Looper podcast, broken down into 3 parts. But thanks a lot.